Another day, another what-if superhero scenario. I thought of a whole bunch of scenarios that could work. Unfortunately, a bunch of them are already videos by the Black Lion, the user I linked last time I did this. And I don't want to step on his toes too much, so I'll try to make mine as original as I can be. With this, I came up with one that he did not do, and that is, what if DC and Marvel switched places? Essentially, if DC had the super popular cinematic universe that started in 2008, while Marvel had to play catch-up and started releasing their movies starting in 2013. Now, this isn't going to be MCU/DCEU equivalent in terms of their heroes. This is simply DC's starting point was 2008, and Marvel's starting point was 2013. Anything can go on from there, and involves way more creativity and guesswork from my end. So enjoy. Might as well start in chronological order and start with DC in 2008. So I was unsure what a good starting point would be. Should I make it a Superman reboot or a Batman reboot or something entirely different? Then of course I remember the movie that we should have gotten, which would have started the DC cinematic universe we should have gotten, which is Justice League Mortal. Now there is going to be a bit of tweaking in regards to the release date, because it was pretty much going to be released in 2009 if it got released at all. However, for the sake of this video, they would have gotten it released in 2008. The story would have been pretty similar to the script that was leaked online years ago, except with some flaws being ironed over and whatnot. The cast would have been the same, with DJ Catrona, Armie Hammer, yeah, I know, Megan Gale, Adam Brody, Common, Santiago Cabrera, and Hugh Keith-Byrne as our Justice League, Jay Baruchel as Maxwell Lord, Teresa Palmer as Talia al Ghul, Zoe Kazan as Iris Allen, and Anton Yelchin as Wally West. All that is known after this is that almost every Justice League member would have gotten a spinoff, but that's it. Next is The Flash in 2009. Now, I was kind of racking my brain with what movies should appear next, as the only ones that seemed plausible were The Flash and Wonder Woman, but I feel The Flash was further along than Wonder Woman was, so I opted for that one. In terms of others, people were still trying to wash the taste of Superman Returns out of their mouth, so that wouldn't have been made as quickly. Batman couldn't, because Nolan would have probably been egotistical about having another Batman also being on screen the same time as his glorious vision, so he's out. Then Martian Manhunter is simply not a popular enough character, and Green Lantern will come later. So The Flash it is. I imagine this movie would have been about Wally West trying to fit in the role as the new Flash due to Barry's death in Justice League Mortal. I think Brody still had a contract, so he could maybe appear in dream sequences and flashbacks to include him if necessary. Anton Yelchin would have reprised his role as Wally West. The main villain I feel would have to be Zoom, since the whole basis of the movie is Wally not feeling like he could be the Flash and live up to that mantle. And the whole basis of Zolomon's Zoom is that he tries to make Wally a better hero, no matter how much fucked up shit he has to do. So in terms of who I'd get for a director and writer, there were a lot of names rolling around pre and post Justice League Mortal, but the ones in terms of the time that I think would work the best would be Dan Mazzot for writer and David Dobkin directing. Then we have Wonder Woman in 2010. Now we get to the other more likely choice with Wonder Woman. Many people had been trying to get this off the ground since the 90s, and at the mid-2000s it seemed likely that this would have been made if people got their shit together, especially if Justice League Mortal had been made and was a success. So again, it would follow the events from Justice League Mortal and not be an origin story. Maybe some flashbacks, but that's about it. It would take place in then present day. I wouldn't want a huge villain like Ares, because I feel like that would have been too big, while someone like Cheetah might be too small. I think Cersei would probably be the best option because of this. She's powerful, interesting, and I think would work as an eventual villain, because I might use, like in the film we got, that Wonder Woman left Themyscira because of Ares and fought him already. With this, Cersei will be the villain. The writers for this film would be Matthew Jennison and Brent Strickland, as they were the ones writing a script around that time, so I might as well use them. One of the names considered for the director's chair for the film we got was Michelle McLaren, and I think she would be a good fit here. Next up is Green Lantern in 2011. Yeah, easy to see why I wanted to save this one until this year, right? I mean, it just kind of makes sense and sort of works to have this version also come out in 2011. But in this case, it would be Common as Jon Stewart rather than Ryan Reynolds as quote-unquote Hal Jordan, even though he really acts more like Guy, but that's beside the point. It wouldn't be the same plot, obviously, but I think I might stick with the same villain, Hector Hammond, because I feel like having one of the other Corps be the main villain would be a bit too much for the first outing of a Green Lantern film. But obviously no parallax, and it would be set pretty much entirely on Earth. You could maybe tease other Lanterns and have them cameo as well, whether that be Earth-based like Guy Gardner or other favorites like Kilowog, Tomar-Ray, and Chip, maybe in small scenes throughout the film. The writer would have to be Jeff Johns, and I think a good director would be Steven Summers. Next is Aquaman. So this would again not be totally like the film we got, as I feel the technology for the underwater scenes wouldn't be there yet. However, it would still obviously be featured in water, just not as much. There would be a bit of an origin story, just not incredibly lengthy. I feel as though Black Manta would be a better suited villain rather than Ocean Master, because Ocean Master's origin, by the time this would be released, wouldn't have been revised yet. And his old origin might have been considered too silly for modern audiences. You know how these guys work. This would also showcase Arthur trying to find a balance between his two worlds, due to him in Justice League Mortal fully embracing his Atlantean side at the beginning and being a bit more in tune with his human half by the end. However, this would go further into that arc. Zach Penn would write and Peter Jackson would direct. Next is Superman, Man of Tomorrow. Due to the fact that Man of Steel came out in this year, I felt it would have made sense for this version of Superman to also come out this year. It would be simpler fare and simply have Lex Luthor as the villain. Well, that would probably play it pretty safe. I felt that having a bigger threat like Zod, akin to Man of Steel, or someone like Brainiac might be too much, considering that Justice League Mortal had a rather large threat in terms of like the big OMAC army and that kind of thing. And it's assumed that they would have wanted to keep it grounded in terms of threat because of that. It wouldn't be a remake of the first film or anything. It would be a different story, just have the same villain is all. With this, Matthew Vaughn would write and direct. Next up is Plastic Man, our first non-Justice League spin-off. I feel like this would have been the most likely non-Justice League member film to get a green light, as they had been working on getting one made for years, and I feel it fits in with this universe and what they are doing, as well as Plastic Man being in the original Tower of Babel story, which Mortal took inspiration from, so I felt that made sense as well. The villain could be anyone, either a jokey villain or a serious villain. I think Kite Man could possibly be the villain, as in his revised origin, O'Brien was one of his gang during the heist gone wrong that gave him his powers. But if the timing doesn't add up, then other villains that could work are maybe Dr. Dome, Whirling Dervish, or Quisp. I think having someone silly could add to the action comedy tone that they would probably go for. With this, David Tennant was the rumored Plastic Man at the time, and I think he could make the comedy work, as well as any more of the more serious aspects, if any, in the film. Then, since there would be no Guardians of the Galaxy, I think James Gunn would probably fit the best to write and direct. Next is Justice League Power. Now, moving on to the next Justice League film, I thought a fitting villain this time around would be Amazo, as that would be a simpler idea, but could bring about some interesting themes with our characters, using their powers against them, but in a new way. The first film dealt with their weaknesses, their mortality. Well, this time around, it would be their powers, and using those against our heroes, hence the title of the film. The 7 actors would return, as well as George Miller to direct and Mulroney's to write, and by 7 actors, I mean obviously Anton Yelchin instead of Adam Brody. Next is Batman the Caped Crusader. Now, the reason I waited a bit to do a Batman film was because I wanted there to be enough time between Nolan's version and this version. With this, we have Batman taking on Dick Grayson as Robin. While he managed to work with a team of people as a team player, how would he do that one-on-one? Would it be the same or different? And would he be able to do it? So that's what this film would explore. He could be played by any young actor at the time. I think Dylan Sprayberry or Chandler Riggs could do a good enough job. The villain is one that maybe shouldn't have been on screen yet, again, at the time. Clayface, Black Mask, Man-Bat, Victor Zsasz, any of those could be good. Man-Bat could be a really good villain, albeit very simple, due to the fact that Man-Bat is a reminder of what Batman used to be, more of a primal and deranged monster than anything, and now he's taking on a young ward trying to make him better than he was, so that could all feed into itself. I think a good choice to write and direct would be Neil Marshall. Then next up would be Static. I think this would be a good choice for around the time, mainly because in 2014 they were considering to do a live action series, so I think they could have translated that to film in a way. I know Jaden Smith was the biggest name for the series, and even though he's not the best actor, he could have probably done it fine. But if I were to choose, I think RJ Cyler could have been the better fit. With this, the villain could be any of the Bang Babies from the original comic, like Bulletproof or Virus. Hot Streak would be another good go-to since he caused this in the first place. In terms of who would write and direct, I think a good choice would be Reginald Hudlin, as his production company was going to be behind the actual series. However, he still has some good movies under his belt, and I think he could be a good choice himself. Next up is The Flash 2. This would follow in similar tone to the first one, with Wally trying to be the best hero he could be, and instead of having a speedster villain again, I'm going to use Abracadabra. I think he could be a fun villain, as well as the idea of time travel being introduced, but I did also want to mention that due to when this comes out and who played Wally West in this universe, this film would be dedicated to Anton Yelchin, who died the same year. The part would eventually be recast. Sean Levy would direct, and David S. Goyer would write. Next is Green Lanterns. This one would formally introduce Guy Gardner and the Sinestro Corps. The Sinestro Corps would be the main villain of the piece, while Guy Gardner wakes up from his coma in this film. There is animosity between the two Green Lanterns, as Gardner claims that the title of Green Lantern was stolen from him because of his accident. So it would essentially be Stewart and Gardner learning to work together so that they can stop the threat of the Sinestro Corps. Jeff Johns would return to write, and Chuck Russell would come on to direct. Next is Wonder Woman 2. So this time around, the villain would be Dr. Psycho. I think he could go either way in terms of villainous nature. He could either be really goofy, something akin to what he was in the Harley Quinn show, but maybe a little less jokey, or have him be incredibly serious. I would prefer the latter, but it could go either way. Patty Jenkins would come in to direct, and Alan Heidberg would come in to write, similar to the film we got. Next up is Superman 2 Brainiac. Pretty obvious who the villain would be this time around, Brainiac. With this would be a bit more serious in nature due to the fact that this would tie back into Superman's origins, with Brainiac being the reason as to why Krypton exploded. So it would have Superman really embracing what he is on both sides, almost avenging Krypton in a way, but also defending his home. It would be more epic in scale, and it could be an adaptation of the Brainiac story, or it could do its own thing. Brad Bird would write and direct. Next up is Aquaman 2. So here, the Ocean Master would be the villain and would kind of follow the film we got, mainly in terms of Ocean Master wreaking havoc upon the surface. The ingredients would be vastly different, but the concept would remain there. You wouldn't have his origin or the stuff with Atlanta and him being an outsider, as it was already showcased that in the original film, as in Justice League Mortal, that he was King of Atlantis already. So it would simply continue what the original film already set out to do. Will Beall would write and James Wan would direct, like the actual film we got. Next up is Teen Titans. Alright, so for a bit we are taking a divergence from the main continuity. Similar to what I did for Static, I'm gonna be taking a bunch of shows and make them movies for this universe, with the first being Teen Titans. Either Sprayberry or Riggs would return as Robin, and then I would say, best case scenario, get a bunch of unknowns as the rest of the Titans, which would be the new Teen Titans group, Starfire, Beast Boy, Cyborg, and Raven. The group would fight Brother Blood, as I felt that Deathstroke would be a bit too much of a cop-out, even though he is a great villain. I would get Chris Columbus to write and direct. Next is Swamp Thing. Again, this would adapt some elements of the show, but for the most part be its own thing. I'd get rid of all the Justice League Dark references, as I don't think anybody would be planning that in this world, but the villains would be General Sunderland and Floronic Man. However, they would be slightly different from their show counterparts. There wouldn't be an origin, so there wouldn't be a human version of Alec Holland in this, but Derek Mears could still fit with playing Swamp Thing. It would be written by Gary Doberman and directed by Guillermo del Toro. Next is Doom Patrol. Of the TV show adaptations, this would be the final one for a while. Again, it would kind of sort of adapt the first season, but not really. Mr. Nobody would still be the villain, and you could use the original cast since they all did a great job. Maybe get someone with a bit more star power for Chief, as much as I love Timothy Dalton in the role. I know Kelsey Grammer was considered at one point for the role, so he could probably work. Only reason I say that is you could get away with not as famous people for their roles if you have someone with more star power in one of the bigger roles. It would be written by C. Robert Cargill and directed by Scott Derrickson. Next up is Booster Gold. This was considered for a TV show for a while, but I think the tone of this character would fit here. The villain would simply be Blackguard, and you could possibly have a cameo from Blue Beetle, whether that be Ted Kord or Jaime Reyes. Billy Magnuson has always been my go-to for Booster Gold, but I think maybe a more popular choice could be Sean William Scott. He could do it, even though I think he's a bit too old for the role, so I think the safe bet is Magnuson. He's younger, and he could pull off even younger if need be. Jon Favreau would write and direct. Next is Justice League Primeval. Now, you could already guess that Vandal Savage is the villain with that title, but I think having standalone villains would suit better in this world rather than team villains like Crime Syndicate or Legion of Doom. This would be the first film without Anton Yelchin as Wally West due to his unfortunate passing. So with that, I think Jamie Bell would be a good fit for this version of the character. But Savage would be the villain, and Miller and the Mulroneys would return to direct and write. Next, we have The Flash. So this would be Jamie Bell's first full feature as The Flash, and this time he would be fighting Cicada. If done right, unlike the TV series, this could be a really cool villain and showcase the disturbing nature of the cult in all the right ways. This would be written and directed by Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly. Next, there is Wonder Woman 3. Alright, so this one would feature Dr. Poison and Cheetah as the main villains. I think it would be cool to have both of these characters because you could use the mad scientist nature of Poison and have Cheetah be some sort of bad experiment that came from the testing that Poison was doing. There are a bunch of versions of both villains, but I think the one that would make the most sense would be the Marina Maru version of Dr. Poison, as that would be the one that had a lot of history behind it and not extremely new like the New 52 or Rebirth versions. Then for Cheetah, I think it makes the most sense to have the Barbara Ann Minerva portrayal, as she is the most popular version of the character. It would be directed by Patty Jenkins and written by Jason Fuchs. Next is Batman 2. Deranged. We have our Batman sequel, and this time the villain would be, if you couldn't guess by the title, the Mad Hatter. I just feel like he would be a really cool villain, and you could do a bunch of different things with him, whether it be creepy serial killer, a mentally ill man with a knack for trippy scenarios and hypnosis, or even go for the more goofy side like the original character. Or hell, combine all three for him. That could work as well. Also, since this takes place in 2022, and Armie Hammer would have definitely been dropped from playing the character after the whole controversy with his weird-ass cannibal fetish and also his sexual allegations. So with this, I think a good replacement would be Robert Pattinson. Fuck it, they're the same age, we know he can play Batman, so he'll play Batman from this point forward. Not like there's much left, but still. But let's keep this train going and make it Matt Reeves to write and direct. Finally is Green Lantern and Green Arrow in 2023. So our final DC film in this cinematic universe would be a Green Lantern and Green Arrow team up to fighting a rather odd villain that I think could work, Black Hand. Mainly because he can drain power from lantern rings, so I think it could be interesting to have a somewhat powerless Green Lantern. Now, it could be Stewart or Gardner, as he was made a Green Lantern in the last film. I think Stewart could be good to take some inspiration from Beware My Power. Yeah, I know, not the best source for inspiration, but I liked how you had Stewart teaming up with Ollie for this movie, when it's usually Jordan and Ollie. You could bring up some past stuff with Jordan and Stewart's partnership with him, as well as his friendship with Ollie. I think that could deliver some interesting ideas for this film. I think Garrett Hedlund would be a good Green Arrow for this universe. With that, I think a good choice to have write and direct would be Shane Black. Now we are in the present day, and this is where I leave you for the DC side of this universe. I think Justice League Mortal could have started something really interesting, and this is just my take on it. Tune in next month where we look at the Marvel side of things. See you later.